The lasers found his father's forehead just as David was about to break Elias's fingers one by one. A figure dropped 40 feet from the steel rafters and landed without a sound. Mark, the brother who officially never existed, raised a suppressed pistol and said, "Episode 1, the architect dies." But that began before dawn, in a house that looked perfect to anyone passing by. 13 hours earlier, the morning sun hit the glass kitchen table in geometric patterns. Elias Miller, 19 years old and wearing a crisp white polo that cost more than most people's weekly rent, sat with his silver spoon suspended over a blue ceramic bowl. Inside the bowl, organic granola floated in milk, and beneath the surface, a dead moth drifted like a small, gray ship. His mother, Martha, stood at the marble island, wiping the same spot with a yellow microfiber cloth. Swish, 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 swish. The spot had never been dirty. Martha's knuckles were white from gripping the cloth. Her eyes darted between her son and the window, where the morning stretched out bright and unbearably normal. The sound of leather-soled shoes on hardwood announced David's arrival before he entered. His suit was charcoal, tailored to within an inch of perfection. His tie was silk and red, the kind of red that looked like dried blood under certain light. He adjusted it using the stainless steel refrigerator as a mirror, not looking at Martha, not looking at Elias, just checking the angle of his knot. On the refrigerator door, beneath a perfect magnet in the shape of an apple, was a calendar. Someone had circled Elias, pre-med prep, in red ink. The circle had been reinforced, gone over multiple times, pressing so hard the pen had nearly tore through. David pulled his Rolex Submariner from his wrist, a gesture that took exactly 3 seconds, checked the time, and returned it to his wrist. Everything was performance. Every movement had been choreographed so many times, it no longer resembled a choice. "The admissions board dinner is at 7 tonight, Elias," David said. His voice was the kind that expected compliance before the sentence finished forming. "Be sharp." Martha turned, and her smile appeared like something snapping into place. It was wide and bright and reached nowhere near her eyes. She picked up a porcelain mug of coffee, steam still rising from it, and extended it toward David. Her hand trembled. The ceramic made a small, fragile sound against the counter as it touched the granite. "He'll be perfect, David," she said, and her voice had gone up 3 notes, became something artificial and thin. "We all will. I've ironed the silk shirt." Elias looked down at his granola again. The moth had sunk deeper. He could see its tiny wings folded against its body. He could see its legs, impossibly thin, frozen in whatever position death had taken them. He pushed it under the surface with his spoon and held it there, watching the milk cloud slightly around the insect. The grandfather clock in the corner of the kitchen, an antique that David had purchased at auction to demonstrate cultural refinement, ticked forward. It was 7:31 a.m. The day was just beginning. By 12:15 p.m., Elias was leaning against a rusted green dumpster in an alley behind a high-end grocery store. The manila envelope in his hands felt heavier than paper should. Inside were bank statements he'd purchased with cash from a contact he'd met through a forum on the dark web, a contact whose name he still didn't know. The statements showed accounts that didn't appear on any tax return. The numbers were in the red, deeply red, catastrophically red. Miller Properties carried a balance of negative $240,000. This was supposed to be simple. Quick exchange. No complications. A man in a dirty gray hoodie stepped out from behind a stack of wooden pallets. His teeth were yellow. His grin was not friendly. "Your old man owes interest, kid," the man said, and his voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "That envelope? Give it here." Elias didn't think. He swung the envelope like a weapon. It connected with the man's face. Papers exploded into the air like startled birds, receipts, statements, account numbers, all the proof of his father's elaborate fiction scattering across the concrete. The man, the thug, lunged forward. His hand wrapped around Elias's throat with the casual strength of someone who had done this before. Elias felt his back slam against the metal dumpster. The impact forced the air from his lungs. Stars bloomed in his vision. The dumpster rang like a bell. The sound echoed up the narrow alley. Elias brought his knee up. The strike landed. The thug's grip loosened for just a moment that was enough. Elias found a glass beer bottle on the ground, still half full of flat beer that smelled like a basement. He smashed it against the edge of the dumpster. The glass cracked with a sound like a bone breaking. He held the jagged neck toward the man, his hands shaking hard enough that the broken edge caught the light and threw it around like a fractured star. The thug retreated, cursing in words that seemed to contain sounds human mouths shouldn't make. He disappeared back between the pallets and into the shadows. Elias dropped the bottleneck. Glass scattered across concrete. He scrambled to collect the papers, his hands moving too fast, fingers trembling so badly he could barely grip them. One statement fell to the ground again. He picked it up, stared at it. The red ink showing $240,000 seemed to bleed further into the paper, as if the number was alive and spreading. He shoved everything back into the manila envelope and ran. At 4 p.m., Elias stood in his father's office. The room smelled like old leather and the kind of wood polish that cost more than it should. The walls were mahogany. The furniture was mahogany. The desk was oak, genuinely old, with a patina that David claimed came from a Victorian estate sale, though Elias suspected it came from a catalog. On the desk, in a silver frame, was a photograph. The family in Hawaii. Everyone wearing white linen, everyone smiling with the exact same smile. The kind of smile that said nothing and meant nothing. Even in the photograph, they looked trapped. The top desk drawer had a lock. Elias found a paperclip in a glass tray, a tray that had probably held paperclips that cost $5 each. He straightened the clip and went to work on the lock mechanism. The tinkle of metal on metal filled the quiet office. Dust motes hung in the air, suspended in the late afternoon light coming through the window. Outside, a lawnmower hummed at a neighbor's house, a sound so ordinary it felt like mockery. The lock clicked. Inside the drawer was a black leather-bound ledger. Elias opened it. The pages were filled with handwriting in his father's precise script. He found a section labeled, in underlined letters, "The Performance." Below that were entries. Monthly payments to a woman named Elena. Amounts ranging from $3,000 to $8,000. And below that, a list. Scripted topics, family dinner. 1. Elias's medical future. 2. Martha's charity work. 3. The 10% growth lie. 4. Comments on market stability. 5. Praise for Elias's dedication. 6. Comments on house improvements. 7. Retreat plans. Summer. The list went on. Every conversation was written down. Every interaction had been predetermined, rehearsed, and then checked off like items on a shopping list. In the back of the ledger, folded like a forgotten bookmark, was a birth certificate. The name on it was Mark Miller. Date of birth: 15 years before Elias was born. Date of death, listed as private. Elias had never heard of Mark. The floorboard behind him creaked. He turned. Martha was standing in the doorway. She held a laundry basket, and inside the basket were only white shirts. David's white shirts, pristine and perfectly bleached. Her face had gone pale. Not pale like fear. Pale like someone had removed all the blood at once and forgotten to return it. "He told me he burned that," Martha whispered. Her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. She walked to Elias. Each step seemed to take an enormous effort, and took the birth certificate from his hands. She turned it over. On the back, in David's handwriting, 5 words. The price for a new start. "Who is Mark?" Elias asked. His voice didn't sound like his own. Martha looked toward the door. She listened to the silence of the house. Then she pulled up her sleeve. Her forearm was marked with a series of small, circular scars. They were old, faded to pale white against her skin, but unmistakable. Cigarette burns. 5 of them, arranged in a neat line like a countdown. "Mark didn't follow the script," Martha said. Her voice was sharp now, something underneath it like steel. "So your father made him disappear from the record. Made him disappear from everywhere." She pulled her sleeve back down with precise movements. "I stayed. I thought I could protect you by staying." That evening, at 7 p.m., the dining room glowed like a stage set. The table was set with silver cutlery, 6 pieces at each place, arranged in descending sizes. White linen napkins had been folded into perfect triangles. A crystal decanter held red wine that caught the light like it was capturing something liquid and precious. Dr. Aris sat across from Elias. He wore a tweed jacket and had a beard that was probably styled by someone who charged an hourly rate. His teeth, when he smiled, looked too white to be real. David poured the wine. His movements were sharp and aggressive. The wine gurgled into the glass. It looked like blood. Martha followed him, her face a mask of terror that she tried and failed to hide. In the kitchen, Martha was backed against the refrigerator. David held a handful of her hair in his left hand. His right hand was raised, pulled back, ready to strike. He was whispering something into her ear, something that made her eyes shut tight, something that made her body go rigid in a way that had nothing to do with tension. Elias didn't think. He didn't plan. He didn't weigh consequences or calculate outcomes. He tackled his father from the side. Both men crashed into the kitchen island. A bowl of vinaigrette shattered. Oil and vinegar spread across the white tile floor like an ink blot test from a psychiatric evaluation. They rolled together, struggling. Elias swung at David's chest. He felt his father's fists connecting with his jaw, once, twice, and his head snapped back. His head hit the floor. Stars exploded again, brighter this time, more insistent. David had gotten on top of him. His father's hands were around his throat now. And David's face, David's calm, perfect face, was transformed into something animal and vicious. David pulled a wooden rolling pin from the counter. White flour dusted its surface. He raised it over his head like an axe. The sound of the cast-iron skillet connecting with his back was like thunder. David groaned and rolled off. Elias coughed, his lungs burning as they filled with air again. Martha stood over David, holding the skillet in both hands like a shield. She was trembling, but her eyes were fierce. "Get out, Elias," she commanded. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Run to the car. Go!" By 8:30 p.m., Elias was driving his silver Audi down a rain-slicked suburban road. The wipers beat a rhythm against the windshield. Slap, 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 slap. His hands shook on the leather steering wheel. The leather was warm, but he felt cold. His phone vibrated in the console. The ID said, "Unknown." He answered. Put it on speaker. The voice that came through was distorted, digitally altered, run through some kind of filter that made it sound like it was coming from underwater. But underneath the distortion was a cadence that was familiar. Familiar in a way that made his chest feel tight. "He's coming for you, Elias." The voice was urgent. "He knows about the ledger. He knows about Mark." Elias pulled the car over. The street sign said, "Welcome to Pine Valley." Behind it, suburbs stretched out into darkness, all of them identical, all of them clean, all of them performing their normalcy for an audience that wasn't watching. "Who is this?" Elias asked. He pulled up the photograph on his phone, the photo he'd taken of the ledger with his camera. He zoomed in on the list of payments, scanned through them, and stopped. Dr. Aries, consulting fees, $5,000 every month, for 10 years. The man at dinner, the man with the perfect teeth, the man who had sat across from him and smiled while knowing everything. "Where are you?" Elias asked. "Warehouse on Route 7, the voice said. "The old textile place. Bring the ledger. Come alone." "Why should I trust you?" But even as he asked it, Elias understood. This voice, this cadence, this way of speaking that was almost like his own but older, worn down by something terrible. "Because I'm the one who's been watching them," the voice said. "Because I'm Mark." The warehouse was filled with mannequins. They stood like silent sentinels, draped in gray cloth, their plastic faces frozen in an expression that might have been a smile. The space was vast and dark, the kind of dark that seemed to have weight to it. Elias walked carefully between them, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The beam caught the edge of a mannequin's face. The plastic had yellowed with age. The eyes were painted on, flat, empty, watching nothing. Two men emerged from behind a row of mannequins. They wore tactical gear. One held a taser. The other held nothing because his hands were already making fists. Elias threw his flashlight at the first man's head. It connected but didn't go down. The second man fired the taser. The prongs buried themselves in Elias's shoulder. The world became electricity. Every muscle seized. His body convulsed like it was being operated by someone else. Someone cruel and very good at causing pain. He fell to his knees. The concrete floor came up to meet him. They dragged him to a wooden chair. The zip ties around his wrists were heavy-duty, military-grade, and they bit into his skin as they tightened. The rough plastic cut into him. He could feel small beads of blood forming where the ties pressed deepest. David stepped out of the darkness. He looked like he had just stepped out of a shower. His suit was impeccable. His tie was perfectly knotted. He held a surgical scalpel, and the blade caught the dim light with surgical precision. He looked calm, bored almost. He looked like someone who had done this before. "I told you that you were destined for medicine, Elias," David whispered. His voice had a melodic quality to it that was somehow worse than if he'd been shouting. "Let's see how much you can take before you follow the script." He walked a slow circle around Elias. The scalpel moved. Elias's white polo shirt fell open down the center, the fabric parting to expose his chest. David held up a tablet. The screen showed a video feed. Martha was sitting in a dark room, bound to a chair identical to the one Elias was in. But she wasn't struggling. She was talking, into a headset. "Scene 4 completed," Martha said into the headset. Her voice was cold and professional. "Elias is at the warehouse. Bring in the secondary team." David zoomed in on her face. She wasn't the victim. She was the director. "Your mother is the director, Elias," David said. His voice had taken on a tone of pride, like he was explaining a particularly clever chess move. "She's been in on it from the start. Mark wasn't a brother. He was a previous recruit who failed the pilot." Elias hung his head. The weight of it was too much. His neck couldn't support it. He let his chin fall to his chest and wept silently. Tears tracked down his naked chest. He could feel them sliding down his ribs, warm against his skin. The deception was complete. There was no escape that hadn't been planned. There was no truth that hadn't been scripted. There was no moment of his life that hadn't been written down in a leather-bound ledger by the man who had created him. A red laser dot appeared on David's forehead. David's body went rigid. He slowly raised his hands. The scalpel fell from his fingers and clattered to the concrete floor. A figure dropped from the steel rafters 40 feet above. The landing was silent. A perfect tactical descent that left only the softest whisper of sound. He wore tactical black from his neck to his boots. His face was scarred. His eyes were the color of storm clouds. He held a suppressed pistol aimed at David's heart. The face was Elias's face. Older, harder, weathered, but unmistakably the same bone structure, the same angle of the jaw, the same dark eyes. "Mark," Elias breathed. "Episode 1, the architect dies," Mark said. His voice was low and rasping, a voice that had been damaged and never quite healed. "That's the rewrite. Scene complete." Mark cut through Elias's zip ties with a combat knife. The plastic fell away. Elias rubbed his wrists. The skin was raw and red, already starting to bruise. The cuts from the ties stung when the air touched them. David backed into a corner, pleading now, offering money. His perfect composure had shattered like the bowl of vinaigrette on the kitchen floor. He looked small and pathetic and desperate. Mark kept the gun trained on him, not blinking, not wavering. "We have to move," Mark said to Elias. "Get up." Elias got up. His legs were shaky. The adrenaline had started wearing off. And now all he could feel was pain. In his jaw, in his ribs, in his wrists, in the place behind his eyes. He looked at the warehouse layout. He'd spent time studying the consulting papers that David had left on his desk, papers about warehouse security architecture. He knew where the main electrical terminal was. He knew what would happen if it short-circuited. He ran to the fuse box on the far wall. He pulled a piece of copper wire from a mannequin stand. The internal framework that held the plastic form together. He used his knowledge of chemistry, the one class he'd actually enjoyed, the one thing they hadn't been able to make him hate, to create a short circuit. He jammed the copper wire into the main terminal. Blue sparks flew. The electricity jumped and crackled. There was a loud pop that echoed through the warehouse, and then every light went out. Total darkness. The kind of darkness that was absolute. Mark pulled a pair of night vision goggles over his eyes. The world became green and geometric in his vision. He grabbed Elias's hand and pulled him toward a loading dock door. "Stay with me," Mark said. "Don't let go." "Where are we going?" Elias asked. "Away," Mark said. "And then we're going home." The basement of the Miller residence was beneath the wine cellar, beneath even the foundation in a way that architectural drawings would never show. It was a room filled with monitors. 20 screens, maybe more, each one showing a different angle of the house. Every room was visible. Every movement was recorded. Martha sat before the largest terminal, her hands resting on a mechanical keyboard. Her face had the exhausted expression of someone who had been awake for far too long. She didn't turn around when the door kicked open. "I suppose the finale was always going to be like this," she said. "The truth is much more boring than the drama, Elias." One of the monitors showed David still in the warehouse, sitting alone in the dark, crying into his hands. His composure had been completely destroyed. He looked like a man who had just realized he was made of nothing but the lies he'd been telling. Mark moved to stand behind Martha with the gun still in his hand. He didn't say anything. He just watched. Elias walked to the main terminal. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. There was a file open on the desktop, a video file titled Family Study Phase 3. Below that was a document, full results summary, and a folder labeled Mark's Footage, Original. Martha didn't move to stop him. She just sat there, motionless. Elias clicked on Delete. A prompt appeared. Delete file? Yes, No. He clicked yes. A progress bar appeared. It began to move. 25%, 50%, 75%. Martha reached over and picked up a small, old photograph from beside the keyboard. She handed it to Elias without looking at him. The photograph showed a young Martha and a young David. They were standing on a beach, their arms around each other, looking genuinely happy. There was no performance in their faces. There was just youth and love, and the possibility that things could be real. That was before, Martha said quietly. Before the performance became more real than the original. Before I started forgetting. Before I did this. Forgetting? Elias asked. Martha pointed to a pill bottle on the desk. The label read, "Early onset Alzheimer's, prescribed to Martha Miller." The doctors said I would lose myself, Martha said. Everything I was, everything I remembered, would be erased by my own mind. So your father proposed an alternative. Create a perfect script, perfect roles, perfect performance, everything written down, everything recorded, so that even after I couldn't remember my own name, I would still know how to play my part. She looked at the monitors. One showed her sitting in this very chair, a loop of footage on repeat. Another showed David in the dining room, performing his role perfectly. Another showed Elias as a child, playing with toys that had probably been selected for their developmental value. I thought I was protecting you, she continued. I thought if I could keep the house from falling apart, keep the performance running, it would keep everyone safe. But all I did was teach you that nothing was real, that everyone was an actor, that love was just another script to follow. The progress bar reached 100%. The file was deleted. The video, the data, the entire record of their synthetic family, it was gone. Martha pulled the keyboard toward her. She began typing. Files deleted, records erased. The evidence of the experiment being systematically destroyed. What are you doing? Elias asked. The same thing I should have done years ago, Martha said. Burning the script. She hit a final key. The screens went blank, one by one, as the data vanished. When the last screen went dark, the basement was silent except for the cooling fans in the servers beginning to shut down. The sun was breaking over the horizon at 5:30 a.m. The sky was painted in oranges and purples and a shade of pink that should have been called something poetic, but probably had an actual Pantone number. Elias and Mark stood on the front porch of the Miller residence. Elias was holding a small backpack. Inside it were his real belongings, the things that had never been part of the performance. His sketchbooks, his old clothes from before his parents had decided he needed to be someone else. A journal he'd kept hidden under his mattress where no one would find it. Mark handed him a set of keys. They were heavy in Elias's palm. The keychain was plastic and cheap, the kind you'd find at a gas station. The keys were for a rusty truck parked at the edge of the property. It was the exact opposite of his silver Audi, dented, patched, and fundamentally honest in its deterioration. Mark held up his wrist. There was a tattoo there, small and simple. A circle with a line through it. He traced it with his finger. Escape, he said. I got it after I left. Every time I almost went back, I looked at it and remembered. Where did you go? Elias asked. Everywhere, Mark said. Nowhere. Anywhere that wasn't here. Anywhere that wasn't a script. They walked toward the truck. Elias looked back at the house one last time. It sat behind them, perfect and white and carefully designed to project success. Every window was clean. Every line was precise. Every element had been selected by David to create the illusion of a perfect family. In the upstairs window, the window of David's office, a figure appeared. David stood there, watching them. He wasn't angry. He looked lost. He looked like a man who had built his entire identity on a lie. and now didn't know what he was made of. Elias turned away. They got into the truck. The door was heavy and squeaked when it opened. The interior smelled like rust and old oil and something like freedom. Mark turned the key. The engine roared to life, loud and messy and completely unrefined. They began to drive away. As they turned onto the street that would take them away from the house, Elias pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was a drawing he'd made when he was 7 years old. Before the performance began, before everything became scripted, the drawing showed 2 boys standing on a beach. One was older than the other. Both were smiling. In the corner, in his childish handwriting, it said, "Our family." The drawing that David had told him didn't exist. The drawing he'd found again this morning, tucked in the bottom of a box he'd hidden years ago. Elias opened the window. He held the drawing out into the morning air. The wind caught it and pulled it from his fingers. It tumbled away behind them, swept up in the wake of the truck as it carried them toward whatever came next. "Where to?" Elias asked. Mark kept his eyes on the road. The sun was getting higher. The day was becoming real. "Anywhere unscripted," Mark said. They drove away, and the house got smaller in the mirror. And then it was gone.